They say no good deed goes unpunished, but I never expected my punishment to come with fangs. I was a ghost in this town, a nobody living on the edge of the forest, blending into the background. That changed the night the storm hit, and a dying stranger collapsed on my porch. I didn't ask who he was. I didn't ask about the claw marks shredding his chest or the black veins poisoning his blood. I just did what I was born to do. I healed him. By morning, he was gone. I thought I was safe. But when the sun rose, the birds stopped singing. And then I saw them. 100 wolves, standing in absolute silence, surrounding my house. They didn't come to kill me. They came to take me. The rain in Silver Creek didn't wash things clean. It just made the mud deeper. Lydia Thorne stared out the kitchen window of her grandmother's old cabin, watching the water hammer against the glass. It was nearly midnight. The isolation of the cabin, situated 3 miles from the main town road, usually brought her comfort. Tonight, however, the storm felt angry. The wind howled through the Douglas firs like a living thing in pain. Lydia adjusted the shawl around her shoulders and turned back to her work. The kitchen smelled of dried sage, rubbing alcohol, and steeping tea. At 24, Lydia had inherited 2 things from her grandmother: this drafty cabin and a talent for stitching people back together when the local hospital asked too many questions. She wasn't a doctor, she couldn't afford med school, but among the locals who lived off the grid, she was the first call for a deep cut or a broken fever. Thud. The sound was heavy, wet, and unmistakably human. It shook the front porch steps. Lydia froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She lived alone. No one came up here in this weather. She reached into the drawer near the sink and pulled out a heavy cast-iron skillet. It wasn't much, but it was solid. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling slightly. Silence. Then a low, guttural groan that vibrated through the floorboards. Lydia moved to the door. Her instinct, honed by years of living in the shadows, screamed at her to lock the deadbolt and hide. But the healer in her, the part that couldn't ignore suffering, forced her hand to the latch. She cracked the door open. The wind ripped it from her grip, slamming it against the siding. There, sprawled across the soaked wooden planks, was a man. He was massive. Even curled in agony, his frame was imposing, broad-shouldered and muscular, dressed in shredded tactical gear that looked like it had been through a meat grinder. But it was the blood that made Lydia gasp. It was everywhere, pooling dark and metallic in the rain, mixing with the mud on his boots. Lydia dropped the skillet and fell to her knees beside him. "Hey, can you hear me?" The man turned his head. A flash of lightning illuminated a face that was strikingly handsome but twisted in torture. His jaw was square, covered in dark stubble, and his hair was plastered to his forehead. But his eyes... For a split second, Lydia swore they glowed a violent, molten gold before fading back to a deep, delirious hazel. "Trap," he rasped, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together. "Poison." Lydia looked at his chest. His shirt was torn open, revealing 3 parallel gashes running from his collarbone to his ribs. The edges of the wounds weren't red. They were black, necrotic, and the smell wasn't just iron. It was something acrid, like burning sulfur. Wolfsbane. Lydia didn't know much about the pack politics that rumored to run the underworld of the state, but she knew what wolfsbane did to a human body. It shut down the nervous system. "I need to get you inside," she said, panic rising in her throat. "You're too heavy, you have to help me." The man gritted his teeth, a low growl rumbling in his chest that vibrated through Lydia's hands. He pushed, his muscles straining, and together they managed to drag him across the threshold. Lydia kicked the door shut and locked it. She got him onto the rug by the fireplace. Up close, the damage was terrifying. The black veins were spreading like a spiderweb from the claw marks toward his heart. "Water," he whispered. "No," Lydia said sharply, her healer mode taking over. She ran to her cabinet, grabbing a jar of yellow paste and a sterile scalpel. "If I give you water, it'll speed up the toxin. I have to cut the infection out. Now!" The stranger's eyes snapped open. He grabbed her wrist. His grip was bruising, shockingly strong for a dying man. "Who are you?" "I'm the woman saving your life," Lydia said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "Now let go, or you die right here on my rug." He held her gaze for a second, searching for something. Fear, deceit, malice. Finding none, his hand dropped. "Do it." The next 3 hours were a blur of blood and focus. Lydia worked with a precision that surprised even her. She had to debride the wound, cutting away the blackened flesh that sizzled when the antiseptic touched it. The man, whose name she didn't even know, barely made a sound. He bit down on a leather strap she'd given him, his body arching off the floor in silent agony, sweat pouring off him. She mixed a poultice of charcoal, silver powder, and a rare herb her grandmother had called moonshade. She didn't know if it would work on a man like him, a man who healed too fast, whose temperature ran too hot, but she packed it into the wounds and bound his chest tight. By 4 a.m., the fever broke. Lydia sat back on her heels, exhausted, her hands stained red. She watched him sleep. His breathing had evened out. The angry black lines tracking toward his heart had stalled and begun to fade to a bruised purple. He was safe. She went to the sink to wash up, the adrenaline crashing out of her system. When she turned back, she intended to drag a blanket over him. But the rug was empty. Lydia blinked. The back door was wide open, swinging gently in the damp night breeze. She ran to the door and looked out into the darkness. Nothing. No footprints in the mud. The rain had washed them away instantly. No sound of a car, just the forest, heavy and watching. "You're welcome," she whispered to the empty night, a chill running down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. She cleaned the blood from the floor, bleached the rug, and locked every door. She told herself it was just a random encounter, a drifter in trouble. She was wrong. Lydia didn't sleep. She sat in the armchair facing the window, clutching a mug of cold coffee, waiting for the sun to rise. When dawn finally broke over the ridges of Silver Creek, the storm had passed. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, innocent and clear. But the atmosphere felt heavy, charged. Static electricity made the hair on Lydia's arms stand up. She stood to go to the kitchen, intending to make breakfast and pretend the night hadn't happened. She needed to go into town later to restock her supplies. The stranger had used nearly all her gauze and antiseptic. She walked to the front window to check the driveway. Her coffee mug slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. She didn't hear the crash. She couldn't hear anything over the roaring of her own blood in her ears. They were there. Wolves. Not one or two. Not a pack of strays. The entire edge of the forest, where the tree line met her overgrown lawn, was lined with them. They sat haunch to haunch, a wall of fur and muscle. There were massive timber wolves with grey coats, sleeker black ones, and russet-coloured fighters with scars mapping their flanks. There were at least 100 of them. They weren't moving. They weren't growling. They were simply sitting, staring at her cabin with an intensity that felt like physical weight. "Oh God," Lydia whispered. She backed away from the window. "Oh God, oh God." She scrambled for her phone on the counter. She dialed 911, call failed. She stared at the screen. 0 bars. The cell tower was down. Or they were jamming it. Was that even possible? A sound from the front yard made her jump. It was the sound of a heavy car door slamming. Then another. Lydia crept back to the window, staying low. 2 black SUVs, sleek and armored, were rolling up her muddy driveway, parting the sea of wolves. The animals didn't flinch as the vehicles passed. They simply dipped their heads in deference. The cars stopped in front of her porch. The driver's side of the first SUV opened. A man stepped out. He wasn't the man she had healed. This man was older, with salt and pepper hair and a face made of stone. He wore a tailored suit that cost more than Lydia's house. He was followed by a woman, tall, striking, with hair the color of spilled wine and eyes that looked sharp enough to cut glass. They walked up her porch steps. Knock, knock, knock. The sound echoed through the silent house. Lydia grabbed a paring knife from the counter. It was a pathetic weapon against 100 wolves and armored men, but she refused to be helpless. "Miss Thorne." The man's voice was deep, authoritative. "We know you're inside. Open the door." Lydia didn't answer. She pressed her back against the refrigerator, breathing shallowly. "We aren't here to hurt you," the man continued. "But we will come in if you don't open up." The doorknob didn't rattle. Instead, the wood of the door frame groaned. Lydia realized with a jolt that they weren't going to kick the door down. One of the wolves, she could hear the heavy paws on the porch, was simply pushing against it. "Wait!" she screamed. "I'm coming!" She couldn't afford to have her door broken. She couldn't afford any of this. She hid the knife in the waistband of her jeans, under her oversized sweater, and unlocked the deadbolt. She opened the door just a crack. The man in the suit stared down at her. Up close, he smelled like rain and expensive cologne, but underneath that, there was a scent of pine and musk. "Lydia Thorne?" he asked. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Why are there wolves in my yard?" The woman with the red hair stepped forward. Her name, Lydia would later learn, was Vanessa. She looked Lydia up and down with a sneer of distaste, eyeing Lydia's messy bun and flannel pajamas. "She looks like a stray," Vanessa muttered. "Vanessa, enough," the man said. He looked back at Lydia. "My name is Elias. I am the beta of the Blackwood Pack, and you, Miss Thorne, are coming with us." "I'm not going anywhere," Lydia snapped, trying to close the door. Elias put a hand on the wood. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. "You don't have a choice. Last night, someone treated the Alpha King. Someone saved his life." Lydia's heart stopped. The Alpha King, the man on her floor. I don't know what you're talking about," she lied. Elias leaned in. "We found traces of silver and moonshade in his wounds. Old magic. Nobody uses that anymore. Nobody except the granddaughter of Martha Thorne." He stepped back, gesturing to the sea of wolves behind him. "Alpha Kieran is awake," Elias said. "He is weak, but he is awake, and he has summoned the one who touched him. The wolves are here to escort you, Lydia. You can walk to the car, or they can drag you. But nobody defies the Alpha King." Lydia looked past him. The wolves were standing now, 100 pairs of eyes locked onto her. She realized then that the claim wasn't a romance. It was an arrest. "I'll get my coat," Lydia whispered. As she stepped out onto the porch, the clouds shifted, and a single ray of sunlight hit the wet grass. Simultaneously, 100 wolves threw their heads back and let out a howl that shook the very foundation of the earth. It was a sound of victory, and for Lydia, it sounded like the closing of a cage. The drive was a lesson in claustrophobia. Lydia was sandwiched in the back of the armored SUV, between Elias and the door, which had no handle on the inside. The windows were heavily tinted, turning the bright morning into a perpetual twilight. The convoy moved like a funeral procession for the living. Ahead and behind them, other black vehicles flanked them, and along the tree line running parallel to the road, Lydia could catch glimpses of grey and brown shapes keeping pace with the cars at an impossible speed. The wolves. They were escorting their king's prize. Inside the car, the silence was suffocating. The air smelled of rich leather and the underlying metallic tang of high-grade weaponry hidden beneath seats. But mostly it smelled of them, that scent of deep forest, musk, and raw power that radiated off Elias and Vanessa in waves. It made Lydia's human instincts scream that she was prey-trapped in a den. "Where are you taking me?" Lydia asked, hating how small her voice sounded. She gripped her knees, her knuckles turning white. From the front passenger seat, Vanessa turned slightly. Her red hair gleamed like copper wire. "Somewhere you don't belong, Stray. You should have just let him die on your porch. It would have been cleaner for everyone." "Vanessa?" Elias warned, his voice low but vibrating with command. He turned to Lydia, his expression not unkind, but entirely unsympathetic. "We are taking you to the Blackwood estate. It is the seat of the Alpha King's power. It is the safest place for you right now." "Safe?" Lydia almost laughed, a hysterical bubble rising in her throat. "You kidnapped me with an army of wolves. I was safe in my cabin." "You were exposed," Elias corrected. "The enemies who attacked Alpha Kieran used a rare, magical toxin. The fact that you knew how to neutralize it means two things. First, you are valuable. Second, the people who want the king dead will now want you dead too, just in case you try to save him again. You are under royal protection now, Ms. Thorne, whether you want it or not." Lydia stared out the tinted window as they turned off the main highway onto a private road. Royal protection felt an awful lot like being a prisoner of war. After 40 minutes, the trees cleared. Lydia gasped. The Blackwood estate wasn't a house. It was a fortress carved from granite and glass, rising out of the mountainside like something from a dark fairy tale. It was surrounded by a 15-foot stone wall, topped with iron spikes. Security cameras swiveled on every corner, and armed guards, human-looking, but moving with that same predatory grace, patrolled the massive iron gates. As the convoy approached, the gates swung open silently. The wolves that had been running alongside the cars poured through the opening first, a river of fur flooding the immaculate grounds before dispersing towards the outer perimeter. The SUV pulled up to the main entrance, a grand archway flanked by stone gargoyles that looked a little too realistic for Lydia's comfort. Elias opened her door. "Out, and Ms. Thorne, do not run. You won't make it 10 feet. Lydia stepped out onto the gravel driveway. The air here felt thinner, colder. The sheer scale of the place made her dizzy. "This way," Vanessa snapped, taking Lydia's arm with a grip that made Lydia wince. Vanessa's fingernails were suspiciously sharp, digging into her bicep. "The king is waiting, and he doesn't like to wait." They led her through massive double doors made of dark, ancient oak. The foyer was a cavern of marble floors and towering ceilings, dominated by a winding staircase that seemed to go up forever. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, casting prisms of light on tapestries depicting violent hunts. The house was alive. Lydia could hear low voices coming from other rooms, the heavy tread of boots on stone, and beneath it all, a low thrumming sound, like a giant heartbeat hidden in the walls. Servants, all of them tall, beautiful, and radiating that same subtle aura of danger, stopped what they were doing to stare as Lydia was dragged past. Their gazes were heavy, assessing. Lydia Thorne, the human woman in flannel pajamas and muddy boots, was the only soft thing in a castle made of teeth and claws. Vanessa hauled her up 2 flights of stairs and down a long, portrait-lined corridor. She stopped abruptly in front of a polished mahogany door and shoved Lydia inside. Lydia stumbled into the room, catching herself on a velvet armchair. She spun around, expecting a dungeon. Instead, she was in a suite larger than her entire cabin. It was decorated in cream and gold, with a 4-poster bed that looked like a cloud, a marble fireplace with a roaring fire, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a sprawling, manicured garden that ended at the dense forest wall. "There are clothes in the closet. They should fit," Vanessa said from the doorway, her voice dripping with disdain. "Shower. Scrub that scent of dried herbs and fear off yourself. You smell like prey." "Why am I in here?" Lydia asked, bewildered by the luxury. "Because the king demanded you be treated as a guest of honor." Vanessa spat the words, like they tasted bad. "If it were up to me, you'd be in the cells until we ascertained you weren't a witch sent to finish the job. But Kieran has peculiar notions about debts." Vanessa stepped back and grabbed the door handle. "You have 1 hour. Then the Alpha King will see you. Do not disappoint him. When he is disappointed, people tend to bleed." The door slammed shut. The loud click of a heavy lock sliding into place echoed in the silence. Lydia was alone. She walked to the window and pressed her hand against the glass. It was reinforced, thick enough to stop a bullet. Below, in the garden, 2 massive grey wolves paced back and forth, their yellow eyes occasionally flicking up toward her window. A gilded cage was still a cage, and the beast who owned the key was waiting for her. An hour later, Lydia felt like a stranger in her own skin. She had scrubbed herself raw in the cavernous marble shower, trying to wash away the feeling of Vanessa's claws on her arm. The clothes in the closet were exquisite, silks and cashmeres that felt like water against her skin. She chose the simplest option, a pair of black trousers and a charcoal grey sweater that was soft, but still felt like armor. She refused to feel grateful for the luxury. It was just a prettier way to package her captivity. When the knock came, it wasn't Vanessa. It was Elias. He looked her over, giving a curt nod of approval at her clean appearance. "Come," he said. "The Alpha King is ready." Lydia's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She walked beside Elias through the winding corridors. The deeper they went into the house, the quieter it became. The air felt heavier, charged with static energy that made Lydia's skin prickle. They stopped before a set of towering double doors at the end of a private wing. The wood was carved with intricate reliefs of wolves battling serpents. 2 guards stood outside, motionless as statues, holding wicked-looking halberds. They stepped aside instantly as Elias approached. Elias opened one door and gestured for Lydia to enter. He didn't follow her in. "He wishes to speak with you alone," Elias murmured, and shut the door behind her, sealing her inside. The room was a vast library and study, smelling of old paper, expensive scotch, and the burning oak in the massive fireplace. The only light came from the fire, and the grey daylight streaming through a tall window behind a massive desk. And there he was. King Kieran stood by the fireplace, his back to her, staring into the flames. He was no longer the broken, dying thing on her rug. He was terrifyingly whole. He was taller than she remembered, broad-shouldered, and radiating a raw, masculine power that seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. He was dressed in dark, tailored clothes that emphasized the dangerous breadth of his chest and arms. Even standing still, he looked like a coiled spring, violence restrained only by sheer will. "Come closer, Lydia Thorne," he said. His voice was a deep baritone that resonated in her chest, smooth dark chocolate wrapped around steel blades. It was the voice of a man who had never had to ask for anything twice. Lydia swallowed her fear and walked forward, stopping in the center of a large Persian rug. "You're welcome," she said, her voice trembling slightly but defiant. Kieran turned slowly. The breath caught in Lydia's throat. If she thought he was handsome when he was dying, he was devastating now. His features were sharp, aristocratic, his jaw dusted with the same dark stubble. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were no longer murky hazel. They were bright, predatory gold, gleaming with an intelligence that was both human and utterly animal. He studied her, his gaze traveling from her face down to her feet and back up again, dissecting her. It wasn't a look of lust. It was the look of a predator assessing a new element in its territory. "I didn't thank you," Kieran said softly, taking a slow step toward her. Lydia lifted her chin. "You sent an army to my doorstep and dragged me out of my home. Where I come from, that's called kidnapping, not gratitude." A corner of his mouth twitched up, a almost smile that didn't reach his golden eyes. "You prefer rescue. As Elias told you, the people who poisoned me would have come for the little witch in the woods who undid their work. I merely got to you first." He closed the distance between them, stopping only a foot away. The heat coming off his body was intense, like standing next to an open furnace. He smelled of smoke, cedar wood, and that intoxicating, dangerous musk that seemed to belong only to him. "You knew what I was," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Last night, you saw my eyes change when the pain hit. You felt the density of my bones, the speed at which I healed once the poison was neutralized. Any normal human would have let me die or called the police. You did neither. Why?" Lydia held his gaze, refusing to back down, even though every instinct screamed at her to run. "Because my grandmother taught me that when something is suffering at your door, you help it. I didn't care if you were a man, a wolf, or the devil himself. You were in pain." Kieran tilted his head, a low rumble starting in his chest. "The devil himself," he repeated, amused. "Some would say you're not far off." He reached out, his movements deceptively lazy. Lydia flinched, but he only took a lock of her hair between his fingers, rubbing the strands thoughtfully. His knuckles brushed against her cheek. His skin was scorching hot. "Your grandmother," Kieran murmured, his eyes narrowing, slightly as he looked at her hair. "Martha Thorne, the hedge witch of Silver Creek. She was rumored to have old blood. Powerful blood. The kind that doesn't mix well with ours." He let her hair drop and stepped back, his expression hardening. The playful edge vanished, replaced by the cold authority of a king. "You used moonshade in the poultice," he said sharply. Lydia nodded. "It was necessary to draw out the necrotic tissue. Moonshade is a binding herb, Lydia, used by witches centuries ago to tether souls to bodies that should have died." His golden eyes bored into hers. "When you pressed that paste into my chest, and your own blood from your cut finger mixed with it during the struggle, you didn't just heal me." He walked around her, circling her like a shark. "I woke up this morning, 3 miles from your cabin, fully healed, but with an ache in my chest that wasn't from the wound. I could feel a pull, a compass needle in my blood, pointing somewhere. Pointing to you." He stopped behind her and leaned down, his breath hot against her ear. Lydia shivered violently. I knew exactly where you were standing in your kitchen before my wolves even crossed the property line, he whispered. I can feel your fear right now, vibrating in my own veins. It tastes metallic. Lydia spun around to face him, horror dawning on her. What are you talking about? Kieran's face was grim. You forged a blood bond, Lydia. Accidental, perhaps, but real nonetheless. My life force used yours to jumpstart its recovery. We are tethered. Tethered, she whispered, until the next full moon, when my power is at its peak and I can try to burn the bond out of my system. Our energies are linked. His golden eyes burned with a mixture of resentment and something darker, hungrier. If I get hurt, you will bleed. If I am weakened, you will collapse. And if my enemies manage to kill me before the moon rises. He didn't have to finish the sentence. The implication hung heavy in the air between them. Lydia stepped back, hitting the edge of the heavy oak desk. No, she breathed. That's impossible. I just patched you up. You used magic you didn't understand on a creature you didn't know. Kieran snarled softly, leaning in until his nose almost touched hers. And now, little witch, you are the single greatest weakness of the Alpha King. He placed a hand on the desk on either side of her, trapping her. You aren't a guest, Lydia, and you aren't just a prisoner. His voice dropped to a guttural growl that made her bones vibrate. You are my lifeline, which means you don't leave this room, you don't leave my sight, and you certainly don't leave this estate until I decide you are no longer necessary. He leaned in closer, inhaling sharply at the curve of her neck. You saved the monster, Lydia, he whispered against her skin. Now you belong to him. The next 3 days passed in a blur of terrifying luxury. Lydia was no longer a prisoner in her room, but the freedom was an illusion. She was allowed to roam the East Wing and the gardens, but she was never alone. 2 guards, silent and lethal, trailed her every step, and if she moved too far toward the perimeter wall, she would feel it, a sudden, sharp tug in her chest, like a fishhook snagging her heart. It was the bond. It was Kieran pulling on the leash. She hadn't seen the Alpha King since their confrontation in the study, but she felt him everywhere. When she woke up in the morning, she felt a phantom hunger that wasn't hers. When she sat by the window in the afternoon, she felt a flash of irritation that had no source, likely mirroring Kieran's frustration in some council meeting. It was invasive. It was intimate. It was maddening. On the 4th afternoon, the door to her suite opened, and Elias walked in, carrying a garment bag. His expression was grim. Tonight is the council gathering, Elias announced, hanging the bag on the wardrobe. The leaders of the allied packs are here to discuss the attack on the king. Kieran requires your presence. Lydia looked up from the book she had been pretending to read. Why? To show off his new pet? To show that he is strong, Elias corrected. Rumors are spreading that the poison weakened him. If they sense weakness, the alliance will fracture. He needs to appear untouchable. And since you are the anchor holding his life force in check right now, you need to be by his side. If you panic, he falters. If you get hurt, he bleeds. You are his Achilles' heel, Lydia. Tonight, you must pretend to be his shield. Lydia stared at the garment bag. And if I refuse? Then you endanger us all, Elias said simply. There are wolves at that table who would tear this estate apart if they thought Kieran was unfit to lead. You don't just hold his life in your hands, Lydia. You hold the peace of the entire region. He left her to get ready. When Lydia unzipped the bag, she found a dress that was clearly a weapon in its own right. It was a deep, midnight blue velvet, floor-length, with a slit up the leg and a back that plunged dangerously low. It was elegant, severe, and undeniably regal. She dressed, her hands shaking slightly. She applied the minimal makeup provided, swept her hair up, and stared at the stranger in the mirror. She looked like a queen. She felt like a sacrifice. At 7:06 p.m., the door opened. This time it was Kieran. He stopped in the doorway. He was wearing a tuxedo, but the civilized clothing did nothing to hide the predator underneath. He looked lethal. His golden eyes swept over her, darkening with an emotion Lydia felt echo in her own chest, a sudden, hot spike of possessiveness. "You look—" Kieran paused, his jaw tightening. "Adequate." "You're a charmer," Lydia replied dryly, smoothing the velvet of her dress. "Let's get this over with." He offered her his arm. "Stay close to me. Do not speak unless spoken to. And whatever you do, do not show fear. They can smell it." "I'm terrified, Kieran," she whispered as she took his arm. His bicep was hard as iron beneath the suit jacket. "I know," he murmured, pulling her against his side. "I can taste it on your tongue. Swallow it, or they will eat you alive." They descended the grand staircase into the banquet hall. The room was filled with 20 people seated around a massive long table made of black wood. The air was thick with tension and the heavy scent of wolf. As Kieran entered, every person at the table stood. They dipped their heads, baring their necks in submission. But Lydia saw the eyes. Some were respectful, others were calculating, and a few were openly hostile. Vanessa was there, seated near the head of the table. She wore a dress of crimson silk that looked like spilled blood. Her eyes narrowed into slits when she saw Lydia on Kieran's arm. "My lords and ladies," Kieran's voice boomed, effortless and commanding, "I present Lydia Thorne, the woman who saved your king." He didn't call her a witch. He didn't call her a prisoner. He framed her as a savior. It was a smart political move. Lydia sat at Kieran's right hand. The dinner was a minefield. The council members, alphas from neighboring territories, asked probing questions, their voices dripping with false concern. "We heard the attack was severe," said a man named Victor, a broad-shouldered wolf with scars running down his neck. He stared at Kieran with unblinking black eyes. "Some say you were incapacitated for hours. Is the Blackwood pack losing its edge?" "A minor setback, Victor," Kieran replied smoothly, swirling the red wine in his glass. "As you can see, I am perfectly healthy. The traitors who orchestrated the ambush have been hunted down. Their heads are currently decorating the southern gate." Lydia felt a jolt of shock through the bond. He was lying. He hadn't found the attackers yet. She could feel his anxiety, a cold current running beneath his confident exterior. "And the human?" Vanessa spoke up, her voice sweet and poisonous. "It is unusual for an alpha to keep a human at the high table, unless she is special." "She is under my protection," Kieran said, his tone dropping an octave. A warning growl laced his words. "That is all you need to know." The servers brought out the main course, steaks, rare and bloody. Lydia's stomach turned. She reached for her water goblet, her throat parched. She took a sip. It happened instantly. A sharp, searing pain ripped through her stomach like she had swallowed broken glass. Lydia gasped, dropping the goblet. It shattered on the stone floor, the sound like a gunshot in the silent room. "Lydia!" Kieran turned to her, his brow furrowed. But before she could answer, Kieran doubled over, clutching his own stomach. The bond! The room erupted into chaos. "He is weak!" Victor shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "Look at him! The poison is still in his veins!" "No," Kieran gritted out, his face turning pale. He grabbed Lydia's hand, his grip bruising. He wasn't feeling his own pain, he was feeling hers. Lydia fell out of her chair, convulsing on the floor. Her vision blurred. She couldn't breathe. It felt like her lungs were filling with concrete. "Help her!" Kieran roared, his voice shaking the chandeliers. He fell to his knees beside her, ignoring the alphas who were now drawing weapons, ignoring the confusion. "Elias, get the medic!" Lydia looked up at Kieran through the haze of agony. His eyes were wide, panicked. For the first time, the Alpha King looked truly afraid. "It burns," she whispered. "I know," Kieran gasped, sweat beading on his forehead as the sympathetic pain ravaged his own body. "I feel it. Hold on, Lydia. Stay with me." Vanessa stood over them, looking down with a triumphant, cold smile. She didn't look surprised. "It seems the human is too fragile for this life," Vanessa murmured, and then the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the banquet hall, followed immediately by the sound of shattering glass. The windows, all of them. Figures in tactical gear rappelled into the room from the high skylights and the shattered patio doors. They weren't wolves. They were mercenaries, hunters, armed with assault rifles and flashbang grenades. "Ambush!" Elias screamed somewhere in the dark. Gunfire erupted. Kieran snarled, a terrifying sound that was more beast than man. He scooped Lydia up into his arms, shielding her body with his own, as bullets sparked against the stone floor where she had just been lying. The pain in Lydia's stomach was blinding, but the adrenaline of the attack dulled it slightly. She clung to Kieran's tuxedo jacket, burying her face in his chest. He smelled of rage and ozone. "Hold on," he growled. He moved with impossible speed, dodging through the chaos. He didn't fight back. He couldn't. The pain transferring from Lydia was crippling him. Every time she twitched in agony, his legs buckled. He was fighting two battles, the mercenaries in the room and the poison in her blood. He kicked open the service door, carrying her into the kitchen. The staff had fled. "Kieran," Lydia wheezed. "Put me down. You can't fight. With me?" "Shut up," he snapped. But there was no malice in it. He laid her on a metal prep table and ripped the tablecloth he'd grabbed to press against her forehead. "I'm not leaving you." "The poison," she gasped. "It wasn't for you. It was for me. To stop. You." "I know," Kieran said, his eyes flashing gold in the dim light. They knew about the bond. Someone told them. The kitchen door burst open. It wasn't the mercenaries. It was Victor, the rival alpha from the dinner, accompanied by 3 of his men, and Vanessa. Kieran spun around, placing himself between the wolves and the table where Lydia lay. He stood tall, but Lydia could see his hands shaking. The poison in her system was paralyzing him too. "It's over, Kieran," Victor said, his voice echoing off the stainless steel appliances. "The council has decided. You are compromised. A king who is tethered to a fragile human bitch is a liability we cannot afford." "So you hired hunters to storm my home," Kieran spat. "You call that strength, Victor?" "I call it necessary surgery," Victor sneered. "We cut out the rot." Vanessa stepped forward. She looked at Kieran with a twisted mix of longing and madness. "I tried to warn you, Kieran. I told you she was a weakness. If you had just let her die that first night, none of this would have happened. We could have ruled together." "You," Kieran growled. "You told them about the bond. You poisoned her drink." "I did it to save you," Vanessa screamed. "Once she dies, the bond breaks. You'll be free. You'll be strong again." She pulled a silver dagger from the folds of her red dress. "Move aside, Kieran. I'll make it quick." "Over my dead body," Kieran said, his voice low and deadly. "That can be arranged," Victor said. He signaled his men. "Kill the king. Make it look like the hunters did it." The 3 wolves lunged. Kieran roared. Even weakened, even poisoned, he was the Alpha King for a reason. He caught the first wolf in mid-air, slamming him into the industrial refrigerator with a bone-crunching thud. He spun, his claws extending, and slashed the throat of the second. But Victor was an alpha, too. He took advantage of Kieran's momentary distraction. He slammed into Kieran's side, tackling him to the floor. Lydia watched in horror as the two massive men brawled on the tiles. Kieran was slower than usual, his movements sluggish because of her pain. Victor landed a heavy blow to Kieran's jaw, then another to his ribs. "Stop!" Lydia screamed. She tried to sit up, but the room spun violently. Vanessa walked toward the table, the silver dagger gleaming. "Don't worry, sweetie," she cooed. "You won't feel a thing. And then he will finally forget you." Lydia fumbled on the prep table. Her hand closed around the handle of a heavy meat tenderizer. As Vanessa raised the knife, Lydia swung the mallet with every ounce of desperate strength she had left. Crack! The metal mallet connected with Vanessa's wrist. Vanessa shrieked, dropping the knife. Lydia didn't stop. She rolled off the table, crashing to the floor. She grabbed the fallen silver dagger. "Kieran!" she screamed. Kieran, pinned under Victor, heard her voice. He looked up. His eyes met hers. Lydia slid the dagger across the floor. It spun across the tiles, sliding perfectly under Victor's guard. Kieran grabbed the hilt. With a roar of exertion, he drove the silver blade upward, into the gap of Victor's armor, straight into the heart. Victor gasped, his eyes going wide. He slumped forward, dead weight. Kieran shoved the body off him and scrambled to his feet. He was bleeding from a gash on his forehead, and he was swaying, but he was alive. Vanessa was clutching her broken wrist, backing away toward the door, terror replacing her arrogance. "Kieran, please," she whimpered. "I did it for us." Kieran didn't even look at her. "Get out, before I rip your head off." Vanessa turned and fled into the night. Kieran rushed to Lydia, scooping her up from the floor. She was fading fast. The poison was shutting down her organs. "Stay with me," he commanded, his voice breaking. "Lydia, look at me." "Tired," she whispered. "We have to go," Kieran said. "The estate is compromised. Victor brought an army, and my guards are outnumbered." He carried her out the back exit of the kitchen, into the cool night air. The sounds of battle, gunfire, howling, screams, raged from the main house. The fortress had fallen. "Where?" Lydia murmured. "The woods," Kieran said, breaking into a run toward the tree line. "We go to the one place they won't look, the one place where the magic is old enough to hide us." "My cabin?" she asked weakly. "No," Kieran said, holding her tighter as he sprinted into the darkness of the forest. "There is a sanctuary deep in the mountains, an old wolf den. We just have to make it there before the poison stops your heart." Lydia rested her head against his shoulder. She could feel his heart beating, a frantic, powerful rhythm against her cheek. "Kieran?" "Yes?" "You saved me." "We saved each other," he rasped. "Now shut up and breathe." They vanished into the trees, leaving the burning estate behind. The king and the healer, bound by blood, hunted by their own kind, running for their lives into the very darkness where their story began. The sanctuary was not a building, but a cavern hidden behind the veil of a waterfall deep in the Smoky Ridge Mountains. It was a place of ancient magic, smelling of damp earth and centuries of silence. Kieran collapsed onto the stone floor, cradling Lydia in his arms. She was limp, her skin the color of ash. Her breathing was shallow, a terrifying rattle that echoed in the quiet cave. The poison Vanessa had slipped into her drink was ancient and cruel. It wasn't just stopping her heart, it was severing the tether between her soul and her body. "Lydia!" Kieran roared, his voice cracking. He slapped her cheek gently, trying to rouse her. "Do not leave me, that is an order." Her eyelids fluttered, revealing whites rolled back. Cold. she whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the waterfall outside. Kieran tore off his shredded tuxedo jacket and wrapped it around her, but he knew it wasn't enough. The cold was internal. The bond between them, that invisible wire of energy, was fraying. He could feel her slipping away, and with her, a massive part of his own strength was fading. He realized then that Elias was right. She wasn't just a weakness. She was his other half. If she died, the Alpha King died with her. Not physically, perhaps, but the man inside the beast would be gone forever. I have to burn it out, Kieran muttered to himself. It was a forbidden technique. To force alpha energy into a human body was dangerous. It could kill her instantly. But doing nothing meant watching her die slowly. Outside, the clouds parted. The full moon, heavy and luminous, bathed the waterfall in silver light. Kieran ripped his own shirt open, pressing his bare chest against hers, skin to skin, heart to heart. "Lydia, listen to me," he whispered into her hair. "I am going to hurt you to save you. Forgive me." He closed his eyes and reached into the deepest, darkest part of his soul, the place where the wolf lived. He didn't restrain it this time. He drew upon the raw, molten power of the alpha bloodline. He let out a guttural growl, and his body temperature spiked. He became a furnace. Lydia gasped, her back arching off the stone floor. "It burns!" she screamed, her eyes snapping open. "I know!" Kieran gritted out, holding her tight, pinning her thrashing body against his. "Let it burn the poison! Take it, Lydia! Take my strength!" He visualized the bond between them, not as a thread, but as a conduit. He poured his life force into her. Golden light began to emanate from his skin, wrapping around them both in a pulsating cocoon. Lydia screamed again, a sound of pure agony that tore at Kieran's heart, but he didn't let go. He could feel the poison, a cold, oily sludge in her veins, being incinerated by the fire of his blood. Minutes felt like hours. Slowly, the black veins on her neck began to recede. The rattle in her chest smoothed into a deep, desperate gasp for air. Her skin flushed from ashen grey to a feverish pink. Kieran slumped forward, exhausted, his forehead resting against hers. The golden light faded, leaving them in the dim blue shadows of the cave. Silence returned, broken only by their ragged breathing. "You," Lydia whispered. Her voice was hoarse, but strong. "You set me on fire." Kieran pulled back, his golden eyes searching her face. "Better fire than the grave." Lydia reached up, her hand trembling, and touched the jagged cut on his forehead where Victor had struck him. It was already healing. "Is it over?" Kieran sat up, pulling her into his lap, wrapping his arms around her as if he intended to never let her go again. He looked toward the mouth of the cave. Through the curtain of water, he could see the distant glow of fire on the horizon. The Blackwood estate was burning. "The battle is over," Kieran said, his voice hard and cold. "But the war has just begun." "We lost everything," Lydia murmured, leaning into his warmth. "No," Kieran corrected. He took her hand and placed it over his heart. It beat with a steady, thunderous rhythm, synced perfectly with hers. "They took my house. They took my throne. But they didn't take you, and because of that, they have made a fatal mistake." He looked down at her, the golden, fierce light in his eyes, softening into something resembling adoration. "The bond is permanent now, Lydia. You felt it. I poured my soul into you." Lydia nodded. She could feel him in the back of her mind, a constant, comforting presence. She wasn't afraid anymore. She felt powerful. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Now," Kieran said, baring his teeth in a savage grin, "we heal. We gather the wolves who are still loyal, and when the snow melts, we take back our kingdom." He kissed her then, not a gentle kiss, but a seal of a dark promise. It tasted of blood, ash, and forever. Lydia Thorne, the healer from the woods, had saved the Alpha King. In return, he had given her a destiny she never asked for, but one she would no longer run from. As the dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in violent shades of red, 100 howls echoed from the valley below. The loyal pack had found them. The king had fallen. Long live the king. And that is where we leave Lydia and Kieran, standing in the ashes of their old lives, ready to burn the world down to build a new one. From a humble healer in a cabin to the queen of a broken kingdom, Lydia's journey proves that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones you fall in love with. They lost the battle for Blackwood Estate, but with the blood bond now permanent, their revenge is going to be legendary. What do you think? Did Lydia make the right choice saving Kieran that first night, or should she have left the wolf to his fate? And be honest, if 100 wolves showed up at your house tomorrow, are you opening the door? If this story had you on the edge of your seat, please smash that like button. It helps us bring more stories like this to life. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss part 2, where we see Kieran and Lydia take their revenge. Share this video with a friend who loves a dark werewolf romance. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.